Hi everyone! Welcome to a quick overview of Chapter 11 on political parties. So the first thing to know, which you probably already know, is that the United States has a two-party system. So this is not because there is any law banning third parties. It's just that for most elected offices, when you go to vote, you have a choice between a Democratic candidate and a Republican candidate. So because we have only two parties, our parties tend to be what we call big tents. So they are not kind of narrowly focused on a single issue. They are not very ideologically pure about things. What they try to do is broaden their appeal to bring as many groups as possible into this broad cooperation. So when you look at the Democratic Party tent, it includes organized labor, the poor, African Americans, women, the LGBTQ community, and environmentalists, among other groups. The Republican Party tent includes business, the wealthy, white people, men, religious conservatives, and other groups on the more conservative side. So this doesn't necessarily mean that every member of a group neatly fits into one party or the other. I mean, I'm sure we can all think of somebody who is a woman but a Republican, or somebody who is a man but is a Democrat. But just broadly, these are the groups who affiliate with each of the parties. Your chapter also gives you a history of party systems in the United States. So a party system is a period of time when there are two parties and they have a pretty stable coalition of groups supporting each party. The Democratic Party came on the scene in 1828. This was the party of the common people, the party of farmers, the party of the poor. Their opponent at the time was the Whig Party. So the Whigs were the party representing business and the elites. The Republican Party started as a third party. It was an anti-slavery and pro-business group that actually became so powerful and popular, they replaced the Whigs to be one of our major parties. So since 1860, the Democrats and the Republicans have been our two parties. As you read through the chapter, it details how, although we've had these same two parties, the coalitions supporting the parties and the regional bases of support have changed periodically. So they call these periodic realignments in the groups that support each party. So the most recent is the sixth party system. This started in the late 1960s when Southern whites switched from being very supportive of the Democratic Party to being very supportive of the Republican Party. This is called Nixon's Southern strategy that helped to make this happen. So the Democratic Big Tent that had been this party coalition for the Democratic Party since the New Deal included organized labor, Jews, Catholics, Northern African Americans, and Southern whites. So these were all groups that were poor, groups that benefited from New Deal social welfare policies. So things like Social Security, things like poverty relief, very popular among all of these groups. But what changed in the 1960s? The big thing was that federal civil rights law began to be enforced. Southern whites were very upset about this. They resented this kind of imposition of federal government authority telling them how to, run their communities. They felt that they didn't really have a voice in the tent as much as they used to. This was an issue that was important to them, and the decision was not at all what they wanted. So a third party began to be popular in the South, the American Independent Party. was running on a platform of defending segregation, emphasizing states' rights, and phrasing it in terms of law and order. And so this is when Nixon came in. He came down to the South to persuade these voters that the Republican Party would defend their rights. And so this time, instead of this new third party kind of taking over and becoming one of our major parties, instead one of our major parties kind of took the ideas that were becoming popular and incorporated them into their own party platform. And so this is one of the reasons our third parties usually stay pretty small. Anytime a third party starts to be very popular and very influential, one of the major parties will try to absorb their ideas and absorb their voters. So that is what happens much more often than a third party actually growing so popular that it becomes one of the major parties. So the final thing to note in this chapter is that there is an increasing share of Americans who identify as independents. This is this question of party identification, which is, do you think of yourself primarily as a Democrat, as a Republican, or something else? So in recent decades, here's a chart from your book. This yellow line is showing people who say, you know, I really don't identify with either of the parties. I'm an independent. So this has grown to be now the biggest group of Americans. But there's a difference between party identification and how people vote. So even if you don't really think of yourself as a Republican, you don't think of yourself as a Democrat, when it comes to election time, most people pick one major party or the other. Even in 2016, this was a time when both of the major party candidates were very unpopular. A lot of people felt like they didn't really like either one of them. So if ever there was a time when you might expect third parties to do well, it would have been in 2016. But the outcome was Gary Johnson of the Libertarian Party got 3% of the vote. This is the highest percentage the Libertarians have ever gotten, but still very far from, you know, winning even a single state, let alone the presidency. The next largest was Jill Stein of the Green Party, who got 1% of the vote. And the third was Evan McMullin. He was running as an independent candidate, kind of on the platform of he was the one who was the true conservative in this race. And he got 0.5% of the vote. So that's, again, another explanation that people, you know, they don't necessarily feel like they identify with one of our major parties, but when it comes time to vote, they do choose one or the other. So that's a very, very quick overview of the chapter. There's a lot more in the book and on other resources on the Moodle site. So have a good week, everybody.